Now that we completed iteration number 1 and set up our project, let's move on to iteration number 2. In this iteration, we will construct a color from the red component only. So here is our iteration plan. We completed iteration number 1, planning and project setup. So in iteration number 2, our goal is to construct a color, but only using one of the 4 components. And I selected here the red color. You can the red component. You can choose any other one. So again, we follow the app development process through 3 steps: problem formulation, solution formulation, solution implementation. Now you're getting the picture here. There are 3 steps that we keep applying repeatedly or iteratively to different to smaller projects until we reach the end. So same steps. So we define the scope, we define the testing, and do some research. So here, before moving on, you want to learn about digital color, and you learn that we can construct a color digitally from components, and there are different ways to set up those components. The one we are using here is to use the red, green, blue components, and these are values that either can be decimal from 0 to 1 or non-decimal from 0 to 55. We are using here 0 to 1, and because that's what the iOS library that we're gonna be using sets up or knows. Then there's the alpha component, which describes the transparency, how transparent or how opaque the color should be relative to its underlying layer or its background. So 0 alpha meaning that the color is fully transparent, which basically means you don't see the color, you only see the background. And 1 means no transparency or full opaqueness, which means you do not see the background or the underlying layer, you actually see the color. So the scope of this project, what is specifically are we aiming to accomplish in this second iteration? We want to have an app that gives the user the ability to enter a value between 0 and 1, and that value representing the degree of the red, the weight of the red color in the new color, and then display that new color for the user. So this means that we have to select values for the others, because the color is made out of 4 components. If the user is going to give us one of them, then we have to assume the others. So in this case, I'm just going to play with red, so I'm going to assume that the green is going to be 0, the blue will be 0. For the alpha, I will assume it is 1, because alpha 1 means you actually see the color, full opaqueness. If you set alpha to 0, you're not going to see anything because you're only going to see the underlying background. So how do we test this? We can do 2 scenarios. One scenario, set the red to 1, and what you will see, or what the user will see, is a full red color, or set the red to 0, when the user will see the full black color, because red 0, green 0, blue 0, meaning there's no color, so you'll see black. And then yeah, so that's you can say I'm gonna do something in the middle and see like a varying degree of red, which is fine as well. So solution formulation. So how are we going to go about doing that? Okay, so we think in the form of a model, view, control. The model describes the data. What data do I need to have in order to accomplish this scope, to build that scope? The view, what user interface component do I need to have in order for the app to do the function it needs to do? And then finally the controller, what steps or what functions or what instructions the app need to provide the processor in order to execute these functions, and when the app should do that. So start with the model, back to the scope. All the nouns in the scope are potential or candidates for data. So here we have red component and we have a color. So we have 2 data items to represent the model. One of them is a decimal number, and the other one is a type that the iOS need to provide for us, the platform need to provide for us, because it's not really something that's in real life, so it's a digital thing. So we have a type in the iOS platform to represent a decimal number that is called the float, and we have a library in the user interface kit framework, UI kit framework, that is called UI color, UI for user interface, so user interface color. The view, there is a component called UI slider that we're going to use to enable the user to enter a value between 0 to 1. And then there's another component called UI view that we're going to use to display the color. The UI view is a rectangle area, as you will see, so we're just going to color that area, color the background of that area. You may wonder, where would I find this out? The reason you're taking this course is because you're not yet familiar with the iOS platform. So as we go through these projects, I will be telling you or introducing you to several components of the iOS platform. As you learn on your own, read, you will be introduced to other components. With time, you will create your own vocabulary of components in the iOS library, and you'll be familiar with them so you can use them. And you can also search. Once you become more comfortable, you can search and explore what components are out there. If you're really looking for something very sophisticated and you became advanced, you build your own components. And if you're a designer, this is actually a good work that designers do, is they create unique components for user interface. The controller then needs to respond to the user input of a number, and then needs two steps. So for the controller is organized in a class module, that's the software unit. Inside that module, we define function modules or function units. Each function, the class represents one concept, a single concept. So here, our class represents the concept of a controller to the screen. Inside that we have functions. Each function represents a task, a single task only. So now we need a task. What is the task? Read the value that the user entered, create a color, display the color. So that's a task. So we will need to create a function inside the controller and provide instructions to do these tasks. What would these instructions look like? I don't know. So at this step, I just know what needs to happen. How it will happen, I don't know yet, so we'll learn about it in the solution implementation. Again, I mentioned that before, but I'm repeating it here. The point of the process is to take you through what you know in an organized way to help you reach the solution at the end. So you're learning step by step, you're exploring step by step. So if you don't know, you just write what you know, and so on. If you feel you don't know anything, then you go back to the research and do some research, do some reading, and then you come back here and you will find that you know something. So we need a function. So when would this function be executed? Because as we mentioned before, and iOS or apps are what we call event-driven applications or event-driven software, meaning that something has to happen for the app to function. This could be internal, built-in event like loading a view, loading the screen, or it can be a user-generated event. So when do we want to retrieve the data that the user entered, construct a color based on this data, display the color when the user enters it. So here we're going to need to connect that function to a user action on the slider. So once the user make a change to the slider, the function will execute these steps. So now that we formulated the solution, we go to the solution implementation. Here you see the specific task, and if you're in a multi-user team, then you distribute those tasks on multiple users. So here the first task is to add a slider component and set up the properties. Most important properties here are the boundaries. We want the slider to go from 0 to 1. Then we need to add a UI view component, and we'll play with the layout. Connect the slider to the controller as an action so that we have a function that responds to the slider change, and that action will be a function. Then we need to connect the slider also as an outlet. The reason we want to connect the slider as an outlet so we can retrieve its data. Here it's a unique situation that we need two things from the slider. We need to be notified when the slider moves, so that's the action. We also need to know the value of the slider, which is data. So a data is an outlet connection, actions is an action connection. We also need to connect to the view as an outlet. Since we want to change the color of the view from the controller needs to have an outlet connection to the view. And then finally implement the controller function, run the app, and test it. So this is the iteration number 2. So let's in the next video we'll go ahead and implement those and take those steps.